Welcome, Left Reckoners. With me as ever, David Griscom. Hello, David.
Hey, friend.
And joining us once again, Carl Beijer, who is a proprietor of carlbeijer.com. A couple times guest of this program, not for a while though, and I wanted to pick his brain about a number of his blogs because I mean, even going back to Bernie 2015, Carl's been somebody whose blog I've looked to for a lot of very smart, succinct points on things. But Carl, I'm sort of distracted by the Mahmoud Khalil disappearance. So DHS detained a lead negotiator of Colombia-Gaza Solidarity Encampment, Mahmoud Khalil, who was detained on Saturday. I went to bed last night not knowing where he was still on Sunday. We're recording this on Monday. And then now it turns out he's in Louisiana. I'm just curious your immediate response to that.
Well, on one hand, it's scary, right? And I'm not sure that everybody understood that this kind of thing was in the cards with Trump coming. Even people who are very pessimistic about Trump, I never heard anybody talking about them spiriting away Palestinian protesters. But, you know, I guess like for me, on one hand, it's scary and my heart goes out to him and his family and all of that. And on the other, I guess the way I think about this is we're talking about free speech again, instead of Palestine, you know. I wrote a piece a while back called "Don't Let Them Make Israel-Palestine a Free Speech Issue." And the reason that I said that is that we end up spending so much time talking about whether we have the right to speak in defense of Palestine that sometimes we don't get around to speaking in defense of Palestine. And, you know, that's our priority. That has to be our priority above everything at this point. And so, you know, it's on one hand, I come into this with a lot of understanding because it's such a dramatic and such a terrible thing. And on the other hand, I guess I just worry a bit about, you know, what this is doing to a pro-Palestinian discourse that has already been a little bit pacified since Biden left office, largely because of the ceasefire talks, which, you know, are dubious as it is, but that's part of the point of it, is to sort of relieve the pressure on the administration, and it did its job. Also, just because, you know, people were out of school for a while, and whenever people are out of school, the protest movement dies down and then it picks back up afterwards. That I haven't really seen much talk about that in the press when people are talking about what happened with the Palestine movement over the last couple of months. But that's actually, like, if you look at how university officials think about it and talk about it, they're all like, yeah, okay, let's just hold out and this will go away during winter break, or this will go away during summer break. It's just a known thing that protest movements, university-based protest movements, die down over breaks. And you always have to hope that they come back. But in this case, it seems like, especially in New York, it's come back quite a bit, less so elsewhere. I guess one more point I will add is this does, I mean, it's so obvious that I almost don't want to say it, but this does hammer home the point that this free speech deal we have, where we're supposed to defend their free speech and they're supposed to defend our free speech, and we have this reciprocal agreement supposedly in place that keeps anybody from being censored. That's obviously just a complete myth. That's clearly not what's happening. They have no interest, the administration has no interest on protecting our speech on a whole lot of grounds, and they never did. And it's absolute madness to proceed as if, you know, I've seen people say, well, if if the left didn't want this to happen, they shouldn't have been canceling people and censoring people with all the wokeness and stuff like that. They would have been doing this anyway. So, if free speech is very important to you as a matter of principle, then I say fine, defend it in principle, but don't defend it with the belief that doing so is going to prevent other people from censoring you, because that's just not the way it works.
On your first point, it does. I have been a little bit worried about all the emphasis of, he's got a pregnant wife, which is a hugely tragic component of the story, and I feel so badly for her. But even if he didn't, right? Like, the offense is still like, and ultimately, what he's saying and what the protesters were demanding, which is just divestment of Colombia's investments from an apartheid state. And instead, we're calling it material support for terrorism. I mean, we've gone absolutely through the looking glass, and it's also like, I mean, this is the immigration side of it too. I mean, this is an issue. This is a scandal that encapsulates a number of different really hot button issues right now.
I've been worried about, in particular, that point you made about how they are spinning divestment as material support. I would encourage people to just be very careful about who you're donating to right now. I don't want to discourage donations by any means, but you do have to do it bearing in mind that we have an administration that's going to try to spin what you're doing as material support for terrorism. And so you've got to look for, the most legitimate venues that you can find, or the cleanest ones. And I'm no expert on, charitable giving in Palestine, so I don't know who to go through, but it's something that I could really see becoming a pretext for arrests and for all kinds of legal harassment.
I mean, so, on this issue, I think it's one of the more frightening things that we've seen in a long while, just in terms of like the escalation of what's going on. I mean, talking about, material support for terrorist organizations. And, if you look at some of the clips of what the student had been saying that are trying to be painted in some kind of incendiary way, it's truly bizarre. But I'm curious, Carl, if you could kind of speak a little bit about this, I don't know, like the partisan nature of it, right? Because as you're saying, it's like, everyone's sort of saying things like, oh, the left had done this or whatever. But, the left was never really in a position of power. And the fact of the matter is, like, this is happening in blue New York, right?
And what was, I think, Chuck Schumer maybe made a I forget who it was. Somebody made a statement about him today, or tweeted something out about him. Maybe it wasn't Schumer. But in any case, Democrats have been very complicit in this, in the way that they have, from the very beginning of these protests, they've sort of painted them as something dangerous and possibly illegal, and talking, sort of shining a floodlight on any kind of little incident that might have happened, blowing things out of proportion, ignoring a lot of the illegality that went on with the crackdowns. And sometimes, you had that incident out at Stanford, I want to say, with the paramilitary Israel responders. Just wild to me. I mean, this is a moment where, if we did have any kind of vital free speech discourse in our country, Democrats would be able to come out and stand just on that and not have to worry about sort of implicating themselves in pro-Palestinian positioning and stuff like that. There is nothing for them. Like, they don't have that pretext to come out and stand up for us. And it's because people don't actually believe in free speech. So, I'm not really, I wouldn't count on being safe if you're in a blue state, or if you have a Democratic governor or anything like that. It reminds me so much of the organizing I did during the War on Terror, where I was just constantly telling people, be careful who you give your names to, be careful what you write down in emails, say, be careful where you give your money to, just because they are looking for excuses to derail this, and they aren't going to play fair. That's the thing. They aren't going to accept very narrow legal arguments in your defense. They're just going to look for any kind of excuse to shut us down. And so you have to be ready for that.
Well, Carl, I mean, I don't want to get kind of bogged down in the history here, but
Yeah.
I think that it is worth sort of giving a little bit of that perspective for folks. And just tell me if you think that this timeline kind of works here. Is that one of the things is that you have in the Bush era this kind of crackdown on civil liberties, free speech. I mean, literally, we had those quote unquote free speech zones. I think a lot of people, especially some of our younger audience, don't even know about that. Then you have the Obama years where you also start to see this crackdown on whistleblowers, right? You get Trump won. What's scary about it is that we have these Bush examples and these Trump examples, but also I think there has just been almost a kind of political consensus, specifically around quote unquote terror, national security, that hasn't really been pulled back in the past decades.
It's strange, during the Bush era, I think liberals in particular were a bit more clear-sighted about this, where I remember they were concerned about use of the word terror to refer to anything that I don't like. They were concerned about use of words like treason and traitor, and they would be saying stuff like protest isn't treason and stuff like that. And now I'm hearing people, that's one of the favorite liberal burns on Trump is to call him a traitor or accuse him of treason. And, a lot of times it's just on grounds of him doing things that are bad, for example, they'll accuse him of treason for trying to get mineral rights in Ukraine. For example, that's bad, but that's not treacherous. That's not, it doesn't fit. And they're bringing back this whole really dangerous discourse of terrorism, treason. And, you start hearing words like material support. During the Bush administration, the phrase was aid and comfort to the enemy was the one they always used. And I guess I do think there is a conspicuous difference this time around where liberal Democrats do not seem to have the same political incentive to push back against it, or at least they're not doing it. Whereas they did, and that created a little bit of breathing room for protesters where you knew that if things got really bad, you could probably write your blue state senator on free speech grounds or something like that. And they might put in a good word for you. Now, I live in Virginia. I would not count, maybe Tim Kaine. I don't know, but not Mark Warner. Absolutely not Mark Warner speaking up for anyone about any of this. So I do feel the partisan train has really changed. I think that Obama sort of normalized this approach to the war on terror. Just not shutting down Guantanamo, continuing to use these terms terrorist and say doing stuff like maintaining drone warfare outside of legal norms. And he was able to do that because he called them terrorists. So he really sort of helped maintain a separate legal dispensation for so-called enemies of the state.
I will just update, so far Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries still haven't tweeted since their photo op at the Edmund Pettus Bridge yesterday.